Hello, everyone, and welcome to DC Talks. I am your host, Drew Kreisman, here with my brother Ira Kreisman, and we are continuing, potentially wrapping up our very long conversation on this 1990 live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. Look, if it hasn't become clear throughout these episodes, we very much enjoy and are very familiar with this movie, and we'll maybe wrap up our feelings on the end if we can get through to the end of the plot here. We're near the end of it. So let's dive back into that and see how we do here. When last we left our heroes, they had gone off to recuperate at the farmhouse from the Grapes of Wrath, as Casey Jones put it. And April O'Neil, Casey Jones, and the Turtles were regrouping from their loss. Raph was recovering. They were training and meditating and saw an image of Splinter and are now ready to return home and, I don't know, take the fight to the Shredder. I guess it's not really made clear, but they're just like, we have to go back. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Well, with knowing that Splinter is alive, I think the goal now is trying to rescue him.
Right.
Even though Splinter's pretty sure he's said his last words.
Right. So we pick up with them rolling back into New York City in the absolute pouring rain. And, you know, as they're getting out of the vehicle and they're pouring out, and Casey's kind of looking around and he's seeing the neighborhood they're in, he goes, hey, this place actually isn't so bad. And then he sees that they're all climbing into the sewer.
Right.
Oh, boy.
And the way it cuts between scenes here and he's just continuing to complain, it kind of sounds like one continuous complaint.
Right.
But it's like out in the rain and then climbing down into the sewer and then walking through the sewer.
Right, and Casey is just not happy with the situation, right? But April says to him, knock it off. It's just for the night. And Raph wants to go out and immediately start investigating people and getting into fights. Dude, it's been a long drive. Literally, Leo says. Long drive, Raph. Let's take a nap.
And we get this cool thing where some of this is seen through the crack of a door.
Right.
And so so now they're back in the lair, right, which was trashed by the Foot. And we see the boys arguing. And Raphael's actually like, yeah, I know you're right, to Leo, which is like a big step for him.
Right.
But we're seeing it through somebody else's eyes, through the crack of a doorway. And I think that's a really cool shot.
Yeah, super voyeuristic, right? And they don't know they're being watched, and they're kind of complaining at each other and even discussing strategy. And it's like, you guys. And because he's not especially good at the sneaking around, he makes a noise. Does
right.
Young Danny. And it's Danny. April goes and finds him in the closet. And Leo jumps right into protector mode and pulls out the, swords and holds them up to him. And Danny says, "Don't shoot." And Raph says, "I don't think it's loaded, kid." I always loved that comeback from him. It's like, and another reminder that as much as the Turtles do carry weapons, they're all basically, kind of blunt objects, right? The Turtles aren't running around with firearms.
Right. Yeah, they're not packing heat. Though the use of the weapons is one of the things that gets really curtailed in the next movie.
Yeah.
They carry the weapons, but mostly they're just punching and kicking.
Yeah.
And then firearms are a big part of the movie in the third one.
Right. Good point. But so Danny explains that he's run away from home, and April's freaking out and trying to figure out how she can call his father. She's gone right back to everyone's mom, even though she's not actually anybody's mom mode that she has to do. And Danny is pleading, "Don't call my dad. Just let me stay here for the night. We'll call in the morning. I promise." And now everyone's in this weird spot, and Casey is apparently mostly just concerned about, hey, wait a minute, what's all this talk about spending the night down here in the sewers?
Right. What did he think was going to happen? What did he, what were they planning on?
Right. And then, Ira, we have another exchange that has aged oddly over the years.
Yeah. And when I was young, I did not understand this line of comedy. And it is kind of subtle, but it's also not great.
Yeah. So Donnie says, kind of teasing Casey, you're claustrophobic.
And that would explain why he doesn't want to sleep down in the tunnels if you're claustrophobic. And this is where I learned what claustrophobic means,
Same.
by the way. TMNT for the vocabulary skills. But yeah, that's not how Casey takes it. So this is the other big thing that I was talking about when I was saying there's some things Casey does that really come off poorly. Because what he says is, you want a fist in the mouth? I never even looked at another guy before.
Right.
So this is a homophobic joke. This is a joke about gay people. And I just, even at the time, if I had realized that's what the joke was, I probably would have looked askance at it, because when I was a kid, it took a while before I realized that being gay was just something that people could be. When I was a kid, I thought it was only an insult. And so I would have been disappointed that Casey's using this insult that was used against me a lot when I was a kid.
Sure, it was a go-to,
peers.
Especially when we were in school.
Yeah. So it was, if I had understood better, I'd have been a little disappointed. Then looking back, it's really not appropriate, and it's a thing that they probably don't do anymore in the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, there's really just no reason to go there. It definitely does come out of a kind of particularly 80s and 90s jokey homophobia that was very common. The one thing I will say about this as compared to, and I've been rewatching a lot of stuff from this era that's far worse, and we don't have time to talk about Ace Ventura right now, but I do think that the primary joke here, and at least the joke that I got when I was a kid, is that Casey's an idiot. Like, the first joke is that he doesn't know what the word means.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right? So the thing we should be laughing at is that Casey doesn't know what the word claustrophobic means. I actually think that this joke almost would have played okay if you took the "do you want a fist in the mouth" line, because that's the problem, right? Is this violent reaction to the suggestion that somebody maybe called you gay when they didn't even. But I think that, and again, a lot of these jokes, as you were talking about, really do just punch down at the community here, right? And the fact that Casey's reaction to being mistaken, or that he thinks he's been mistaken for one, is to be violent, is super problematic. But I do think that the writer's intention here was to make him the butt of the joke, which for me slightly lessens it. Again, like I said, only when I'm comparing on a scale for a lot of stuff from this time that was unfortunately just, and like you said at the beginning, unnecessarily homophobic. There's just no reason to put a joke like that in there. Like, there's any number of things he could have mistaken the word claustrophobia for, and you get the point across that Donnie knows a fancy word he doesn't, which is, I think, what they were trying to go for. But yeah, inartful at best. I also always found it funny that in order to try to disprove that he is afraid of enclosed areas, once April explains what it actually means, that he goes and sleeps in the truck to try to prove them wrong. Well, show you an enclosed area. All right.
It's a weird flex there, Casey.
Totally. I'd have been far more comfortable in the sewer. I don't know about you, but... So then we get this scene that is really sweet, but for me is like the biggest logical mistake that April O'Neil makes, or maybe that any of them make throughout the story. Because Danny's looking through her like journals and her drawings that she was doing when they were out there at the farm, and says that they're really good, and asks if he can have one, and she says, sure, why not? And I'm like, I can think of a few hundred reasons why you shouldn't be handing out drawings of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to somebody that you barely know.
I do wonder how well she knows him, though. Like, if she's been working at Eyewitness News for 4 or 5 years and Danny's 16, well, she may have known him since he was 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wonder about that as well. It seems like an obvious thing to not do, but she doesn't know he's a member of the Foot Clan.
Sure.
She only knows that he's been fighting with his father. If they're all going to spend the night down here, then maybe it's fine.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know where I fall on that one, really, because it does seem like y'all are missing the clandestine part of Clandestine Mission.
The whole, like, were you seen? Like, well, she's handing out pictures and stuff, bro. Anyway, so Mikey starts waxing poetic aloud about how he could really go for some deep dish right about now. And Danny pipes up, and I guess he's been staying down here for a couple of days because he said he had some pizza down here and there might be some left over. And Mikey and Donnie sprint over to discover it and then hold a funeral for the pizza.
Start humming taps. I really like the line, "Do you like penicillin on your pizza?"
Also where I learned what penicillin was. I actually specifically remember asking Mom and Dad, what is penicillin? And them basically explain it's a kind of medicine thing that and it can sometimes grow out of fungus, which so I remember having I specifically remember having that whole conversation with them. So everyone goes to bed, and Danny is having a nightmare where the themes of the movie are wrestling with each other in his mind. He's
Right.
getting some Shredder lines from earlier in the movie. The outside world rejects you. And he's getting Splinter. Do you have no one to go to? All fathers care for your sons. This kind of, this is your family. Back and forth. Splinter, Shredder, Angel Demon. Danny is trying to make a decision here.
Right. And I really did wonder why, like the good guys are back. Why wouldn't he just hang out with the good guys? Why does he feel like he's got to go back? Because that's what ultimately is going to happen here. But I do wonder if does he feel like he's being ousted from his hideout now because he's been found by these guys? Is he worried that if he does stick around till morning that April's going to call his dad and he just doesn't want to go home? What exactly is the motivation for going back? Because I get that it's sort of that this dream is the impetus for it, but I'm not sure why that would then be the decision.
Sure. But he does go back, and he goes straight to Splinter.
Right.
And Casey, sees him. It's a good thing he went out to the truck because Casey sees him leave and is a little bit on the trail now that something more is going on with this Danny kid. But he goes and he sees Splinter, who says, I haven't seen you for many days. And I love that Danny says, yeah, I've been down at my hideout a lot lately. Like, it's his house, bro.
Right. Well, and does Danny not know that? Is he not going to put together that Splinter and the Turtles are connected? But he has to know, right? Because he's the one who told them that the Turtles were hanging out at April's place.
Right.
And now they've got he's got to know, but he doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's just a plot thing or if it's meant to suggest that he's not sure who to trust. Maybe he's trying to work up to saying it before what happens.
Yeah. And so I think it's exactly that, actually, because they build up to it here. And Splinter says, okay, so if you're hiding now, that means you are hiding from your surrogate family. Another phrase I learned from this movie, what a surrogate family is. Presumably the Foot Clan here. Well, if you're hiding from them, you didn't feel like you were at home. And then you joined this cult and you don't feel like you're at home there. Is that what's going on? And he says the same thing as when Charles asked him why he was stealing stuff in the car. He says, I don't know. And then instead of threatening him, Splinter tells him a story. And, the first part of it we've all heard before. It's a little bit of repeating. I lived in Japan many years ago. I was a pet of my master Yoshi. I mimicked his movements from my cage. I learned ninjutsu, all of this stuff. Right, but then we get to the second half of the story. His only rival was a man named Orokosaki. What a great name, by the way. And they competed in all things, but none more fiercely than for the love of a woman. Cliché trope? Yeah, but works in this story. Especially the way it's filmed in like that classic, this whole scene just feels very classic samurai movie.
Yeah, and I would be more disappointed in using the trope of the woman as a prize, the death of a woman as being the motivating impetus. But it's not really about Splinter's motivation or even Hamato Yoshi's motivation. It's just about Splinter understanding what it is to have a family. So, plus we get April being such a badass in this movie that it's hard to say it's
right, because this isn't the main story, because it's a side story that's told very quickly. I think it, I don't know, maybe feels a little better. And as we've talked about before, tropes aren't always bad. It's just this is an overdone one, so it's worth pointing out.
Sure. It is worth remembering it is a tool to understand, not an inherently negative thing.
So Splinter says that Tang Shen, that her love was only for his master, and so they decided to flee to America, but Saki vowed vengeance. And he says, as my master returned home to find his beloved Shen lying on the floor. And again, this is very dark. It's not graphic in the way we think of, like, it's not Sin City. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
But especially compared to a lot of the rest of the stuff, and especially compared to the next two Ninja Turtles movies, this is sort of violent to look at, even though we're just sort of witnessing the aftermath of it. Like, her body there on the floor is striking in a movie like this.
I think it's really interesting to see that this guy who was probably a big deal in the ninja circles in Japan is now a construction worker in New York. It's almost a stereotypical immigrant job to come home in your coveralls and your hard hat with your lunchbox, right? So it's interesting to see that that's the route they went. He didn't like open a dojo or I don't know, get involved with whatever ninja activities might be in New York, right? He went to the U.S. and took a construction job to support his new family.
Right. But Oroku Saki catches up to them and kills the woman, and of course a fight ensues, and during the struggle, Splinter says, my cage was broken. I leapt to Saki's face, biting and clawing, but he threw me to the floor and took one swipe with his katana, slicing my ear, which is like, for a very small rat.
Right.
All right.
It's a giant sword.
Yeah. So it's clear now that both of the humans were killed. I guess there's no reason for the guy to stick around and fight the rat. He just took one swipe at him to try to get the rat off of him and left. As you would. That actually makes perfect sense.
Sure. Yeah, there's no reason to take out that rat lest he seek revenge.
Right, which seems unlikely, and yet...
Yeah, and yet here we are. But even then, Splinter didn't seek revenge.
Right. He didn't even really know that this was going on. And then we get this last little exchange, which is really beautiful. He finishes the story by saying, and then he was gone, and I was alone.
Yeah.
So we know that may be one of the reasons why Splinter was so inclined to take upon some orphans, because he was an orphan himself.
Exactly. Yeah. If you think of Splinter as Hamato Yoshi's child instead of his pet rat, and I gotta say, I treat my cats like they are,
these animals are spoiled.
Yeah, and I love them dearly. And when one died a few months ago, I was, bereft. It was awful.
Yeah.
So if you think of it that way, like if it becomes a metaphor, then of course, this newly alone young rat comes upon four turtles who he can raise as sons. Of course he does, and of course he loves them.
Yeah. And so Danny asks, well, whatever happened to this Oroku Saki? And Splinter says, no one really knows, but you wear his symbol upon your brow.
Yeah.
Ooh, punch in the gut, dude.
Yep. So we, when we were down in the turtle den, he wasn't wearing it. Right, because I think that the turtles would have recognized the same headband that all the foot soldiers wear. But as he gets, climbs out of the sewer. Casey sees him. He goes out to the warehouse, and as he's approaching the warehouse is when he pulls it out of his pocket and puts it on, which is interesting.
Yeah. And so at this point during the conversation, they are discovered by the big bag meanie Oroku Saki himself, which again, as a kid, they trusted the audience. This is another example of, he just says, that's his symbol, and then here comes the guy. He never actually says, Oroku Saki is now called the Shredder. They just expected us to understand as kids, and we did. We got it. He says, what are you doing in there, boy? Sorry. Almost.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is another one of those scenes where the back and forth is very rhythmic.
Yeah, because Danny keeps answering, nothing. And where have you been? Nowhere. You're lying to me. No. Really quick back and forth. It says, and you're hiding something as well. And he takes out his pokey...
He's always wearing his weapons, right? Like, he's always ready to slice something up.
I call him the Shredder for nothing. And he searches the kid, and of course he finds the sketch of Leonardo and Raphael that April gave him, and logically reaches the conclusion that the turtles have returned. So he turns to Master Tatsu and he says, there will be no mistake this time. I go myself. And the rat, kill it.
Yeah.
They have what they need now, right? And it's funny to me because I've seen, again, so many comic book and other things that are like this, movies, television shows, or whatever, where the villains spend so much time monologuing, right? It's the old Incredibles thing where Jason Lee even mocks the whole idea of like, I'm going to monologue just long enough for you to solve the problem, right? I feel like Shredder makes a lot of logical decisions that a real villain would do. Like, he needed to keep Splinter alive long enough to find out where the turtles were, because he needed to take care of that. But there was no other reason to keep him alive, and now there isn't, so he says, kill him. Like,
yeah.
Gross and horrible, but he's not messing around.
So we cut to Casey now. Remember, he was following Danny, so now he's found the hideout of the Foot Clan, and he sneaks in, and he's doing an admirable job of ninja-ing around the place. And he realizes, look, I'm not young enough to be one of these recruits. So he sneaks up behind one of the foot soldiers and grabs him and like knocks him out and steals his clothes, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then he's trying to scope out the place and he sees Danny and he grabs him. And, dressed as a foot soldier's like, hey, what do you want? Let me go. And Casey pulls his mask off and says, hey, recognize me now, kid? What's the deal? What? Like, he's asking what I was asking earlier. What's the deal? Why are you here?
Yeah.
And if he had the opportunity, Danny might have said, I don't know. And he might not. Like, I don't want to give him too hard a time because
he's still struggling with all of this. Yeah.
Yeah. But what he says is, hey, you got to come with me. Casey says, what are you talking about? Come with you. And Danny says, they're going to kill Splinter.
Yeah. And this is a moment of truth for Danny. And the one where he makes the right decision, right? He understands, like, no, this guy treated me well. He treated me with respect. He told me his story. He offered an ear to listen. I haven't seen him do anything awful to anybody. And now they're going to kill him. And I can't just stand by and watch that happen. I've got to implore Casey to come with me and help him. Like, yay, Danny!
Yeah, Danny is... He definitely gets his hero turn here. Like, for all the shit he's been through, when he really has to make a decision between good and bad, like the obvious good thing to do, he does it, and good for him.
So I guess in all the chaos of them getting ready to go out and fight the turtles, no one was watching Splinter closely enough, and it gives Danny and Casey just enough time to rush back there and try to break him out. Casey has a nice little moment where he gets to introduce himself to Splinter and does the name's Casey Jones, but much more. Again, everyone turns off their their attitude a little bit around Splinter, right? Just his presence kind of demands your respect a little bit. And he looks at him and he just says, a friend. And I really like that moment from Casey because he's been a lot of things that have been very complicated throughout this movie. We've talked about them, but he has been a good friend.
Right. Yeah. He's definitely a hero. And I like that when he first sees Splinter, I don't think he knew Splinter was a rat because he stops and he looks.
Oh,
like,
right.
Was he expecting an elderly turtle, perhaps?
Right. You're right. Yeah, he has a whole minute, and then he just kind of has this smallest little shrug of his shoulders. He's like, all right.
Whatever. Yeah.
I guess
it's not going to get any weirder. They're ninja thieves and mutant turtles. We're going to...
Right.
You obviously helped the old man who's shackled to the chain link fence, right? So now we're cutting to the Foot Clan is invading the den again because the Shredders sent them out. So there's a big fight, and Raphael owns the fight by saying, I do hope there's more of them.
Yeah.
So and the fight is intercut with them rescuing Splinter. So we'll do a little bit of it here, but there's like it's partially a serious fight and partially a silly fight, like we talked about in the antique store.
Right.
Like Mikey sort of nudges a guy this way and that way so that April can bop him on the head from where she's hiding above.
Right. Just messing around. I really like this whole fight sequence, though. I think it's pretty good. And I love Raphael hoping that there's more.
Yeah, it's the confidence of being able to banter while fighting.
Right.
That is nice to see.
Right.
Because they're back in town. The hero music kicks in. It's not the serious music this time. Yeah, I really like it. So like I said, we're cutting back and forth. So now we go back to Casey and Danny rescuing Splinter, and Master Tatsu and a bunch of the young men who are not in ninja suits arrives.
Right.
And Tatsu says,
I believe the direct quote nailed it.
That dude, the guy playing Tatsu, gets a lot across with just scowls and grunts.
Totally.
It's pretty impressive, I think.
He'd have fit perfectly into Final Fantasy Stranger of Paradise. His grunt game is on point. I love this line, too. You want to do this one from Casey? I love this.
Oh, yeah. So Casey, again, like you said, he turns it off for Splinter.
Yeah.
But now that he's threatened by this dude, he says, now, a little Primatine might just help to clear that up there. So who here knows what Primatine is?
Right. I still don't really, but because of the gesture, I understood it was some sort of throat spray that he was making. Oh, what? Oh, you got a tickle in your throat there, buddy?
Right. So it was a current reference at the time, but yeah, it was like a cough medicine that you sprayed into your mouth.
Right.
And Tatsu just starts kicking Casey's ass.
Yeah.
Like punches him right in the face, and Casey's like, "Oh, jeez, all right." But he keeps up the bravado, right? Like, that's going to cost you. And then he calls him Tinkerbell, which again is maybe... Is that homophobic, or is that just...
I don't even know. I mean, maybe. I suppose... I don't
He's trying
know.
to...
Yeah.
I think he is trying to take a dig at Tatsu's masculinity.
Sure.
So whether or not that's homophobic, I don't know.
Yeah.
But either way... It doesn't do Casey much good, his bravado, because he gets his ass kicked.
Yeah, he's just getting his ass beat, even though he keeps talking.
Right, doesn't let up there, but he gets sent flying into some boxes, and he happens to see
his super
golf club. Yeah, it's like
sports equipment.
Casey gets a +5 when holding a sporting club of some kind.
It's morphin' time.
Right.
Yeah.
But he gets a sucker punch in on Tatsu. He gets the drop on him. He
does.
Swings out with that club and right in the gut.
Got some. Back to Tatsu's lesson about, never lowering your eyes or always paying attention. He was standing a little too confidently over Casey Jones, who, like you said, gets in a cheap shot. Tatsu was supposed to be the cheap shot guy, but as we know, Casey Jones is not beyond a cheap shot. No,
absolutely not. And then I think he shouts 4 and takes a big old swing. And
yep.
There's no way this blow should send Tatsu flying, but it worked with the cricket bat and Raphael earlier.
Cartoonishly, yeah. And they set a precedent that this is how physics work in this world. So it's consistent with his own logic, and I buy the distance he gets on Tatsu here. It's ridiculous, and I love it.
I think it's Sam Rockwell here who says, "What are we standing here for? Let's get him." Casey gives him a look and says, "You want to be first, Junior?" Which is a fair question.
Yeah.
And he says, "We have a loyalty to the Shredder," still towing that line, right? And Splinter jumps in. He says, "The Shredder uses you. He poisons your mind to obtain that which he desires. He cares nothing for you or the people you hurt."
Because that's how cults work. They don't care about you. They don't care about the people that you hurt. You are there to serve their ends.
Sam Rockwell's guy, who I don't think gets a name,
right,
backs off a little bit, but he's not ready to give it up yet, because what he says is, "We're a family," which says to me that this guy doesn't have anybody else.
Yeah.
And if he loses this, what's he going to do next?
Yeah. But I really do like Casey's line. This is the closest he gets to wisdom in this movie. And I've actually, this is one I've quoted before too, and I think about every once in a while, because he looks around the room. He says, "Family? Is that what you said? Family? You call this here?" And he points around to all of the, stolen equipment, chain link fences, and the guys who are always fighting each other. He says, "And you call that down there?" And he points at Tatsu, the guy who's been the iron thumb. Is that a thing? I don't know. Over these guys this whole time. Is that you call that family? And he leaves it there. which I really appreciate, because could have been a chance to preach even more there. And like you said, they may not have anywhere else to go, but really ask yourself that question. Like, that guy there, he's your family? And I appreciate that moment from Casey Jones.
And at that point, Casey and Danny start helping Splinter out, and everybody makes way.
Yeah, they just let him go.
Like, yeah, are we going to just beat up on an old man? Like, come on.
Yeah.
So we cut back to the Turtles, and they are pursuing the Foot out of the sewers.
Right.
Like, we had this big scene of the Foot all scrambling into the sewers, and now they're scrambling back out.
Yeah. Retreat.
And yeah, so the Turtles are following, and it's kind of like, on the one hand, they did just invade your home for a second time. On the other hand, they are retreating. Do we need to continue beating them up?
We got to find out where Splinter is.
That is the goal, I suppose, yeah.
Because they don't know that he's headed their way. They don't know that's going on yet. Then we get this fun, again, they're having the banter back and forth while they're fighting people. And remember at the beginning of the movie when they were trading off, like, different hyper words, they're just trying to get excited, and Donnie couldn't come up with one or whatever. So I feel like this kind of echoes that when they're trying to come up with stuff in the fight. And Mikey says, "Hey, Donnie, looks like this one's suffering from shell shock." And Donnie goes, too derivative. Mikey says, "Boy, well, I guess we can really shell out." And Donnie, that's too cliche. And then Mikey says, "Well, it was a shell of a good hit." Donnie goes, "I like it," which I felt like the shell. I felt like they should have inversed them, like. But I guess shell of a good hit, because that one was more of a swear word for the teenagers. Donnie enjoyed that one better.
I see. All right.
But again, I love the way they like critique each other's jokes, like they're grading each other constantly. We'll get one more of those at the end. And kind of the big exclamation point on the comedic part of this, while the Turtles are just kicking all kinds of ass, is Mikey yelling out, "God, I love being a turtle." Which, yeah, self-affirmation. Hell yeah.
Sure. Absolutely.
And then they sort of get up to the rooftop of this building, and where the final bit of the Foot Clan is gone, and fight a few of them off, and they're all gone, and again, Raph's like looking for more. Oh, no more? And then we get one of these tonal shifts.
Yeah, speaking of cool reveals.
Yeah. From who knows where, by the way. He just floats in from camera up. It doesn't matter where. He flies in like Sephiroth. It doesn't even matter, right?
Right.
I don't know how this is physically possible, but it's literally the Shredder just drops in front of them as though he was in the sky. And there he is in full, battle, ready to go. He's got his spear out, all the pointies. And Leo says, "Okay, does anybody have any idea about who or what this is?" Mikey's not done making jokes. He didn't notice that the music changed. So he says, "I don't know, but I'll bet it never asked to look for a can opener." High fives, anybody?
That is a good joke. I like that one.
That one's pretty good, and 100%. And Shredder says, "You fight well in the old style, but you've caused me enough trouble. Now you face the Shredder." Donnie goes, "The Shredder?"
Not impressed is Donatello.
Yeah. Mikey's still on the food theme, goes, "Hey, maybe all the hardware's for making coleslaw."
I would think that for anybody other than the Shredder, like if you show up all intimidating and the boys just start making fun of you for the way you look, like that's got to be, you're suffering disadvantage on your next attack. Like that's a vicious mockery ability, right?
Totally, right? Shredder clearly unfazed, and then the Turtles make their first of a series of mistakes.
Right, they weren't paying attention to this movie. Did they not understand the lesson?
See, they just got hyper confident. They'd been working together. They'd been doing the thing. Raph was too confident. "Oh, I do hope there's more of them," and "oh, no more," and all that. And then now he's like, "I got this guy. Looks like a clown. He calls himself the Shredder." What a joke. I got him. But, So he runs up and tries to attack Shredder and is not dispatched. Hold on now. But he's quickly just brushed aside.
soundly defeated.
Yeah. And Leo remarks, "Oh, okay, all right, this guy's good." And they all do kind of. Once Raph gets his ass kicked, they kind of lock it in, but they continue to attack him one at a time for a minute, which really bothered me for a while. But then the more I thought about it, I thought they are still building up to, of course, that final theme. Like you said, have they not been watching the movie? Have they not been listening? But it's like they've been doing it in spirit. Now they really do need to come together with the physical manifestation of it. So all logically, it's like, why didn't they just start by working as a team? And I still think that would have made some more sense in certain ways. I do just love the way thematically it builds.
I also really like how after Leo loses to the Shredder, Mikey looks at Donnie and says, match you for it?
Yeah. They do a little rock, paper, scissors to decide who's going to fight him next.
So we cut from the fight down to the street. Casey and Danny have not taken Splinter home, but rather to the site of the epic last confrontation. And all the kids from who aren't ninjas, who aren't full members of the Foot yet, have come with them to witness what's going on. And Casey, puts the exclamation point on his argument.
Yeah.
So much for family, huh?
Yeah.
Like, obviously this wasn't about creating a family for you. This was about creating an empire for him.
Right. And now you see it. And then we've seen transition back up to the turtles who are having a huddle.
Right. And Shredder just stands there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's just letting them regroup. They're all like sucking wind. Mikey's asking, now, exactly what point did we lose control here? I do love this line from Donnie. Maybe someone ought to tell him that we're the good guys. Like a little self-referential. Like, our comic book, we're the heroes in the movie. Don't we win?
Right. And I think there is something to be said for when you feel like you're fighting the righteous fight.
Yeah. So Raph asks, does anybody have any thoughts? And Leo goes with the emotional play. He says, I've only got one thought. This guy knows where Splinter is.
Yeah, and this is the point where they all, like, we don't see much of it, but they charge him all at once, so presumably there's some working together, right? And we see a little bit of it, and Shredder still manages to take him.
Yeah, to some super awesome 80s synth music.
Right. And then we cut back down to the street. And Casey is watching the fight, I guess. I'm not sure how you see the fight from the street.
They've got an interesting angle. They can see this.
Right.
Yeah.
He says, looks like your boys are going to need a little... And he looks around for Splinter, and Splinter's not there.
Yeah. So he runs off to make sure to cut off a few more foot soldiers and just kick a little ass. He can't be left out. He's got to do something with his hands.
Right. And he does this thing. He gets in a trash truck. And so there are foot soldiers like climbing the ladder, the fire escape, to go help. And he backs the trash truck into it. Right. Which is a bit brutal.
Well, yeah. Oops. Well, an oops comes later, but
the oops is
later.
One
other oops is in a minute, isn't it? So back up there, and the turtles they're doing better, but they're still losing. And they stop again, and Raph just looks right at Shredder and says, "Where's Splinter?" And Shredder says, the rat. So it has a name, or it had a name. Ooh, this thing. He's doing this thing. And now Leo has lost it. Like, this is the one thing you've seen. Like, don't lose your cool. Don't lose your cool. Oh, you've been on...
It's not Raphael, right?
Right. Who was maybe a little more in touch with his anger than Leo, who's, kept it beneath the surface. But we've seen all movie how deeply afraid he was of this potentiality. And so upon being told that Splinter is dead, he just screams out with all of the emotion in the world, "You lie!" And then he just sprints straight at the Shredder and dives at him. That's not a ninja move, dude. You just...
It's a pro wrestling move.
Yeah, totally, right? And gets knocked to his back eventually. The Shredder flips him over and knocks away Leo's weapons and says, "Do I?" And then he looks at the other turtles and says, "He dies. Weapons, now." And Raph goes first. He thinks for just a second and then tosses aside his sai. And then Donnie and Mikey go at the same time. And as Mikey throws his nunchaku,
yes,
sort of latch on to the ladder behind them, coming up from the street level. And Shredder says, "Fools, the three of you might have overpowered me with the loss of but one. Now your fate will be his." See, he doesn't understand the themes of the movie either. Shredder. You should have just let your brother die, and then the three of you maybe could have beat me. Like, that is not how we operate, dude. Letting your own people die for your benefit is how you operate, dude. So Shredder goes like, I mean, man, this is, again, brutal. He's got this super pointy spear right at Leo's throat. It's like he's about to, jam right through his throat?
Yeah, execution style, I guess.
Yeah. And, the turtle starts screaming, and then with a sound effect and a camera move and whatever, everything is just interrupted, and suddenly there is Master Splinter at the edge of the building at the top of the ladder. And that gets Shredder's attention.
Right. Now here's the Ninja Master. He's been wondering how these turtles can fight like this. And he's a rat, but he's an old man.
Right.
So maybe this is the source of their skill.
Right. And then Splinter turns Shredder's game on him and plays the mental battle better. He says, "Yes, Oroku Saki, I know who you are. We met many years ago in the home of my master, Hamato Yoshi.
Yeah.
You killed my father."
Right, and it's it's kind of wild because it's like, wait, the rat? But why would he remember a rat? And then he takes the mask off, Shredder does. And you see all this scarring on his face, like, oh, he's been thinking about this pet rat for a long time.
Because it scarred his face. And I love the line we get from Raph, because remember, we heard Splinter tell this story to Danny, but of course the boys would have heard this story from Splinter. And so Raph immediately gets and goes, "Oh my God, it's him." And Shredder says, "You. Now I will finish what I began with your ear." And he does exactly what Leonardo just did. And he emotionally rushes in an illogical. So again, I remember thinking, like, when I was, when I rewatched this when I was 19 or something, like, that's so stupid. Why would the Shredder just charge directly toward the edge of a building? But it's like what you just said. He's been thinking about this rat for years, and the finishing of his rival and the scarring of his face, and he wears this thing so that nobody can see his scarred face. And just as Leo did a moment ago, he loses his cool and does something stupid, and it costs him.
Yeah, and I talked before about how Splinter is old in this movie, and he doesn't move real well. And here, it's kind of like when Yoda limps in to fight Count Dooku, right?
Yeah.
And then during the fight, he's spry, and that's probably force powers to some degree, but
sure.
When he has to be, he can leap around and swing his saber. Well, not dissimilar to Master Splinter here,
right?
Who can, when he's being charged by his mortal enemy, he can whip out that nunchaku that did not go over the edge and use it to leverage Oroku Saki over the edge of the building.
Yeah. And it's awesome. It
so is cool. Awesome.
It's so damn cool.
It's badass. And I like that even though he's not up to the long, protracted fights through the streets of New York up to the rooftop, when it counts, he can do what needs doing.
And he can lure his opponent into a situation where he just counters his momentum. It's a counter maneuver, right? Splinter doesn't ever really attack. He just times it, moves precisely, flings that dude right over the side of the building, and then hangs on to him. And it's just probably the most ninja shit in the whole movie.
It's badass. I love it.
And then he gets this awesome final thing to say. Well, not
final for Splinter.
Yeah. But he says, "Death comes for us all, Oroku Saki. But something much worse comes for you. For when you die," and as he's saying this, right in the middle of it, right, Shredder pulls out like a knife or one of his many pointy shreddery thingies, and he throws it at Splinter, which was ridiculous because now Splinter has to let go of the nunchaku holding him up to catch the knife and lets go. And as he lets go, he says, "It will be without honor."
Yeah.
So perfectly edited. And
it's so good.
Yeah.
And it just shows that, again, he is still fast when he needs to be. He caught that knife out of the air.
Right.
So it didn't impale him.
Right.
And now Shredder is the tool of his own demise. We talked about this.
Say Cagliostro. Yeah.
Yeah, when we were doing Studio Ghibli. And Cagliostro, again, the instrument of his own demise. And so it's kind of a trope in kids' literature that the bad guy does away with himself.
Right.
You see it in Disney movies a lot too.
Right.
And I just think it works really well here because it just shows how focused on revenge against a rat this guy was.
Right. Totally. Completely consumed, yeah.
And he falls, and he screams as he falls, and he falls right into the back of a garbage truck.
Yeah. It just happened to be sitting there.
Oh, man. All right, so what do you think?
Does Casey commit attempted murder here?
Right. Like, is this justified? Is this okay? Like, okay, so when we were talking about Batman versus Superman, for all that I don't want Batman to kill people, I got no sympathy for Flamethrower Guy who was about to flamethrower Martha frickin' Kent.
Right.
So is there any sympathy for Shredder here? Is Casey guilty of something here? Or given everything that's happened, are we okay with what Casey does here? Because Casey's not Batman. He hasn't,
Yeah, I mean, I don't love it. I'll be honest with you. When I was a kid, I just sort of thought, oh, haha, get the bad guy or whatever. But, in hindsight, I don't love it. But like you said, he's sort of been a morally gray character in that way the whole time. Like, he started out by slapping around teenagers with his hockey stick. So, in the grand scheme of things, I went with I don't love it rather than I'm deeply horrified by it, because ultimately the Shredder was recruiting hundreds and hundreds of kids into a cult.
Sure.
And there's a deep negative consequence from that. And, I'm not really for capital punishment in really most regards. But, do I think, oh, what a tragedy and the world would be a better place if that guy was alive? No. And also, not for nothing to spoil, I guess, the next movie or whatever, it didn't work. So it's attempted murder at best.
Right.
So, because he's still alive.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it either.
Yeah.
Because I would have assumed that a fall from that height, even into a bunch of garbage, would have killed a person.
Yeah. So maybe he assumed he was already dead and he thought he was just taking out the trash. Yeah. So we get this kind of one final scene where everybody reunites on the streets, and the kids and Splinter reunite up on the rooftop, and everyone's hugging and happy. And we had talked about earlier that scene where Danny steals a little bit of money from April and he gives it back to her and just says, "It's something I owe you."
And she probably never even noticed.
Right. Totally. But again, there's this sort of putting things back, trying to make things right, and I really love the thematic symmetry of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then Danny finds Charles because there's been this big gang fight in the street apparently. So the police are coming, the news is coming, and he's running around looking for Dad, which is it's nice. Like, on the one hand, I think Charles has some work to do here, and we don't see any of that, but Danny is going to start.
Yeah.
And that's pretty brave.
Right. And so, at first Charles is kind of still upset with him. Like, I've had the whole city looking for you, and all that kind of stuff. But he does finally ask, are you all right? Are you okay, Danny? Like, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, right. Stuff had to get bad for you to get there. But thank you for showing us that you're there. Right.
Yeah, and the guy playing Charles looks emotional. Like,
Yeah.
all these actors, like, this is not a huge part, but he puts a lot into it.
Right?
Stearns puts a lot into it. All
Yeah.
these guys do. It's pretty impressive.
Totally. And Danny, who honestly, if we're on the subject, might be one of the weaker actors throughout the rest of the movie. This one part he kills, and this is the most important part. This is huge to me, and actually even more in hindsight. We were talking about self-affirmation just a moment ago, and this may seem like a small thing, but there's so many broad ways to interpret it, because he says, "I'm okay, Dad. I promise I'm okay." And Dad, it's just Dan now. Okay? And there's just something very powerful about defining yourself, especially as you come into adulthood. And whether that's defining yourself in your gender identity or your job or your any number of things, if you're going to be a ninja or not, or your name. Something as simple as just saying, I prefer to be called this. And I want, as the person who traditionally has less power in the relationship of father-son, I want you to respect this boundary that I am setting right now. I would like you to call me Dan. And again, it sounds so silly, but when I watched it, I got like really emotional like this last time. Like never before watching this movie have I really gotten into it. But this moment when he says, "It's just Dan now," and Charles says, just kind of gives him a face of like, "Oh, like, okay, Dan." Like he's accepting it. And that's really, really powerful. That's really important part of the themes of this movie is being accepted for who you are, not having the outside world reject you. And Danny hasn't known how to say, "I don't want to be called Danny anymore." He's been saying, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want throughout this whole movie. And he says, "I want something. I want to just be called Dan." This movie's good, man.
It is good. So, speaking of invoking one's agency to Charles Pennington, now we get a conversation between Charles and April. And this is where April does her own little union negotiation all on her own here.
Yes, she does. I love it because now he desperately needs her back to report the story, especially because it turned out she was 100% right and she knows way more about it than anybody. And all this other stuff.
This is her story.
Yeah. Like
absolutely. And she's like,
time to negotiate.
I don't know, Charles. Yeah. Because he's like, I really need you to cover this. I told you there were circumstances. And she's like, I don't know, Charles. Did you know that Mae Williams over at Channel 5 has her own office? Right. This is the solidarity of workers, right?
Yeah.
We know what the other person makes. We know what the other person's benefits are.
Right.
I want that too.
Yeah. So she gets the office. She's on. I heard she got a corner office. Charles goes, "Okay, you can have a corner office." And she says, she is also one of the highest paid field reporters in all of New York City. And Charles says, "And now you are."
There it is.
He finally handled the negotiation properly.
All right, now we cut to Chief Stearns, who finally wants some answers. He's finally trying to figure out what's going on in the city.
Questions. Yeah, this is some classic police work. He showed up just in time.
Right. Yeah. So facing off against Sam Rockwell and the disaffected youth, he says, "Now what in God's name happened out here tonight? Somebody better talk to me. And no, you know what? All these kids should lawyer up, not say a word.
They shouldn't. But Sam Rockwell hasn't learned that lesson yet.
Right. Well, and it's the early '90s.
Right.
And we got to finish the movie also.
Yeah.
So he says, "Go out to the East Warehouse over at Lairdman Island."
Hey. Reference to the creators of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Eastman and Laird.
Yes.
Really cool.
And nobody here gets arrested, which is kind of wild.
Yeah.
Stearns just says, "All right, let's go."
And then I guess Casey and April have a thing. It's fine.
I don't hate it. They did show that moment they had on the porch swing out at the farm.
They had a moment. They've been through an ordeal together.
Yeah. So he's like, "Oh yeah, I've been looking all over for you," and she goes, "Oh, hi," because she's getting ready to do her job.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Hi. I look like I just called Mike Tyson a sissy."
Yeah. It's funny
and
line.
all you can say is hi.
Funny line.
Yeah. And April's like, "What? You need an ambulance?" so she's taking a dig at his masculinity now.
Right.
And he's like, "No, I just thought, you know." And he goes, and April takes control.
Yeah. At least she does take control of the situation. That's the best part of this, is that she makes the decision at least. It's not the weird massage scene at the house.
Right. She says, "Will you just shut up and kiss me, okay? I got a report to do."
It's a good line.
And maybe Casey wanted April to shove him down in the chair and rub his shoulders, because what he says is, "I love it when you're pushy."
He does. Okay.
You know what? That's a conversation to be had between adults.
Fair enough. And because they can't do anything in private, of course, the turtles are watching, and Donatello awards the kiss a 9.95.
That's not a bad score, I guess. I think, and then Casey Jones gives a thumbs up over April's shoulder.
He does.
Boys, honestly.
And I love it because, and I can't remember which one, but somebody yells out, somebody first goes, "All right, April." I think it's Raph. They're happy for both of them. It's not just Casey. They're not just happy for their guy. They know her better,
Right. Yeah, they've known her a little longer. Yeah, I like that they're happy for them. And then they just start celebrating right there on the rooftop. We won.
Right.
We're going to be okay for a while.
Right. And we're going to hit our word trade-off trope one last time. And so, and I can't remember who goes in what order here. The most important thing is the last one, but they're all kind of going through all of them. They do bodacious, gnarly, totally tubular. I'm a big fan of totally tubular. Wicked, hellacious. Hellacious was a good one. I'm pretty sure Raph drops hellacious. But then Splinter interrupts the proceedings and says,
"Right.
I have always liked Cowabunga."
Yeah! Attaboy.
And they get to end the movie on the big Turtles line. That's how you do the big line, man.
Absolutely. It's, for all that he has been the source of this solid wisdom, and he's very serious, for him to also get to be in on the fun is really nice.
Yeah. And then it does this 80s, 90s TV show, I guess, film thing where they all jump and high five and freeze in midair. And over that, Splinter says the forever classic, "I made a funny."
Yeah, and then it's credits roll and we get that cool rap song.
Yeah.
That I can remember most of, that I'm not going to perform right.
Power, Turtle
That's the
power. And in that song, they actually refer to Raphael as the leader of the group, which I think he had been in some of the early tellings. And it's on obviously more Leonardo these days. But actually, I listened to that whole song over again. I was like, I'm surprised at how many of the words to this I still remember.
Right. So, Drew.
Yeah.
What do you think of this movie? Is it good? Is it worth rewatching? Worth a deep dive?
I mean, yeah, I think we've said a couple of times and made clear as we've gone through here, right? This is a pretty good movie. I think it's funny because, as I've checked out some documentaries around this time and stuff, and even comic book movies, people forget this technically is a comic book adaptation, that it came out not too long after the 1989 Tim Burton Batman movie, and in some ways historically is credited as being one of the things that kind of revitalized the idea of making comic book movies, where there had been a run in the 80s where so many of them had been so cheesy that they just stopped. And with this movie and the Tim Burton Batman movie, and this movie was, by the way, very, very successful, which is interesting. You go and read some of the reviews of it at the time, and I think you just see critics who had no idea how to take a movie with four guys in rubber turtle suits seriously, right? They just couldn't sort of get past that first bit of buy-in, that this is a thing that's for kids, and so it can only be taken so seriously. And even more than it being a thing for kids, it's an especially silly one because, again, rubber turtle suits, right? And I just think it's one of those few pieces of art from its time that's actually gotten better with age. We've talked about some of the ways it didn't age well, but those are few and far between. And a lot of the basic structure and theme of the movie really resonates still to this day. The universal themes about family and self-affirmation and finding yourself and feeling lost as a teenager, or really feeling lost at any point in time. And yeah, I think it's something that if it was viewed through a more modern lens, like if this exact movie came out today, especially if you and I could like clean up the 4 or 5 little bits of things that just don't need to be there, you just take them out, right? Then in a world where people accept something as wild and out there as the multiverse of madness, you know what I mean? This seems far less absurd, I guess is what I'm saying, by a modern standard. And so when I think you just sit down with this film, you find a very earnest examination of family and immigration and growing up and all these wonderful little themes that just happen to have turtles in rubber suits. And so yeah, for me, I actually think it's one of the better comic book movies of all time. I think it avoids some of the tropes that even ones well beyond it would fall into. And it's absolutely got its issues, and it's hard to compare it to something as, you know, advanced and spectacular as, say, Avengers Endgame or something like that. But I wish there were more comic book movies like this. I wish there were more movies in general like this that are family friendly, but not dumb, not dumbed down, not insulting to adults or irritating to adults. Family friendly fare with adult themes even. And so, yeah, I think it just lives in this kind of perfect little space where there's nothing really that you can replace it with. It's a one-of-a-kind movie. Even as we've talked about, we'll get into when we talk about them, the second 2 movies don't even feel like this. Right? There's something uniquely special about this first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that I don't think is really captured in too many other places in the comic book movie arena. And so I think for that alone, and all the other stuff that we've talked about, like, yeah, it's something that a lot of people should go back and rewatch and consider a deep dive and a deep think, and it deserves its place when we do talk about the greatest comic book movies of all time. Like, it's not just Marvel and DC. All right, folks, that wraps up our conversation on a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles of 1990. If you've got more thoughts or questions or things you want to add to the conversation, don't hesitate to hit us up on Twitter, in the Discord channel, or on Patreon. Let us know what other old movies you'd be interested in hearing us discuss, and brace for next time, as we've already got our next one picked out, and we will begin our conversation on The Mighty Ducks.